Hi Lushies, my name's Sabine. You might have seen me from like Instagram lives or other videos, or you might have seen my hand modeling and things at some point. But today we're doing an Ask Me Anything with Katrina, who is our manager of sustainability here at Lush. And we're thinking specifically about celebrating the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, which is coming up on April 22nd. And we're doing an Ask Me Anything to talk with you all, our Lush community, about some of the questions you had around sustainability, systemic changes, personal changes that you can make as we move forward with momentum into the next stage of the climate action movement. We know that we just experienced the global climate strike last year in September, which was something really, really special for me to be able to participate in. And Earth Day this year is something we're hoping we can take to really stop, reset, and get rid of some of those old routines and those old kind of systems that just aren't serving us anymore so that we can move forward into a positive future. So Katrina, do you want to tell me a little bit about yourself before we dive in?
For sure. Hi, Sabine. It's great to see you and to connect with everyone online. A little bit about me. So I moved to Vancouver about 6.5 years ago for this role and the opportunity to join the Lush North America team. Prior to Lush, I worked on sustainability in the food service and food systems with higher education, so working with colleges and universities across North America. And in many ways, there are many similarities between moving from culinary kitchens on campuses to cosmetic kitchens of Lush, whether that's sourcing fresh ingredients, looking at energy efficient equipment, engaging staff. There are a lot of similarities. I think everyone has a really unique journey to get to where they are. Mine started with environmental NGO work in Washington, D.C., to community-based ecotourism work with nomadic reindeer herders in northern Mongolia, to culinary kitchens and dining facilities across the Southwest and Midwest in the US. And now here I am with Lush.
To build off of that, can you tell me a little bit specifically about your role within Lush itself?
For sure. I am fortunate to head up our sustainability team for Lush North America. We're really focused on environmental sustainability. So looking at both our behaviors, the operations, the decisions, the culture of the organization, and then also our built environment. So some of the key areas that we work on are around our greenhouse gas emissions. So looking at energy consumption in our manufacturing and distribution facilities, in our retail shops, that's everything from equipment to production processes to shop design. We look at freight and distribution. So really the movement of raw materials inbound, finished products outbound, digital packages to our customers, people movement, so business travel and employee commuting. And we also look at waste and packaging and circularity. So within that, we look at not just waste diversion, but also looking at reducing the amount of material in general that we use and that we send out, as well as looking at the packaging that we have for our customers and circularity around that. Water conservation is another one, being a bath company, looking at opportunities to reduce water usage in our shops and manufacturing, as well as employee engagement overall. We work as well really closely with our ethical buying team on environmental initiatives throughout our raw material supply chain, as well as with our charitable givings and ethical campaigns team to support the great work that they do around some of that larger systemic change.
I love that. I think it's really cool that we have that interdisciplinary approach to sustainability where you kind of get to see a lot of different things across the business rather than it being like one team slowly just like working away in a corner. So I think that's really cool that you get to touch all those different components. Since you've been with us for a good period of time, I want to know a little bit about what you're proudest of in your role. Is there any specific projects that you're like super stoked about that you want to share?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, really proud of the team and what we've done in really embedding sustainability throughout our business. Like I mentioned, ethics has always been at the core of who we are, but it's always been very organic, which I think is great. But at the same time, when I first started as a team of one, we had no baseline as to where we were or goals of where we wanted to get to or roadmap of how to get there. And so over time, as we've grown to a team of 7, we've since built that out and really done it in a way that's embedded sustainability at all areas of the business, so different departments, but also different levels of the organization to really help us push towards our goals. Being a dynamic business as well, and one that's really grown fast over the years that I've been here, it's been particularly important, I think, to make sure that we continue to walk the talk and don't lose who we are as new people come into the business. So now we've embedded it, whether it's budgeting conversations, really getting the senior leadership team involved in key decision making, and then being truly inspired by staff at all levels of the organization. Some of our greatest ideas have come from some of the folks that we have in our manufacturing floors or out in our retail shops. So I think that's kind of one of my most proud areas. I think the other area is just some of the really tangible wins we've had over the past few years. On the energy side, we've reduced our energy consumption in our 250 retail shops by 20%. We've been piloting some kind of new technologies. One of them is capturing carbon from the bath bomb production process. And through that, we get a byproduct that we can actually use as a raw material in another product that we make. So that's kind of a neat project. We've done some neat stuff around renewable energy. So working with a local biogas facility that we can send our organic waste, and then we purchase back that renewable natural gas through our utility company. So that's kind of on the waste side. On the energy side, again, there's some very tactical projects that we've had, streamlining our partners for our Black Pot return program. Thanks to you and all the customers out there, we have a 17% return rate on our Black Pots, which is pretty amazing. Of course, we've got a long way to go, but doing well. And then we've also improved just waste diversion in manufacturing and retail by 10% in both of those areas, if not more. So there's still a lot that we can do, and I feel like we're making progress, but we have a long way to go as well. And we're really committed to that. And recently actually just committed to setting science-based targets. So joining this global movement of businesses that really are ensuring that we're doing our part and aligning our goals with climate science.
Oh, that's super cool. I think that it's really interesting that as a business, like, we do get really, really deep into like how we're impacting environmentalism. Like, I know when I first heard about the bath bomb carbon capture project, I was like blown away, because that would have been something I would have never thought of. So I think it's really cool that we are getting that byproduct that can be reused. So thank you. I think those are some like pretty cool, fun things that we do that we might not get the chance to talk about that often. And then because we are looking at science-based targets, and we're really, really passionate about making sure that we're maximizing that as we move forward into the future. Can you tell me like a little bit about Earth Day itself as we start to like talk in this AMA about those Earth Day fun facts and answer those questions from our Lushies?
So this is the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, which started back in 1970. And it was really to demonstrate environmental protection, and now has since expanded with events really around the world. The Earth Day Network is really in more than 193 countries.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's a pretty expensive network, not mad. And like 50th anniversary, that's like such a huge thing to celebrate. So then if we're at the 50th anniversary, obviously we've been doing this for a while. Has any other positive outputs come out of the collective movement? Have we like seen anything specific happen around Earth Day that we like can share and highlight?
Yeah, I mean, if you think back to the 1970s, it was soon after Rachel Carson, who's a well-known American biologist and conservationist, published Silent Spring, which is one of the pivotal books really in linking environmental pollution and human health. It was the same time there were anti-war protests, there were factories and automobiles that were spewing pollution, and there was also this general rise in, I would say, collective consciousness around the state of our planet. So when Earth Day first started in 1970, it was, an annual day of recognition, but in many ways, I think it marked the start of the modern environmental movement more broadly, and it got environmental protection onto the political agenda. It led, to the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency and the Clean Air and Clean Water and Endangered Species Act in the US. And over the 50 years, the movement has just gained momentum globally with more major events like the 1992 Rio Earth Summit, COP21 and the Paris Agreement, among others. And as the planet really has gotten worse, I think the dialogue between communities and governments and businesses has shifted from that of environmental protectionism in the 1970s to really the urgency of the climate crisis that we face now.
For sure. I think for me, being able to participate in the climate strike in September really, really made it click for me that we're in like a full crisis. So it's like nice to see that background and how the movement's like continually changing. And then thusly with change, this year we're actually all practicing social distancing, which is why you and I are Skype video calling. So that also changes Earth Day's typical strike that they do. Can you tell me a little bit about what Earth Day's doing this year and what Earth Day Live is?
Yeah, for sure. So while youth really helped to mobilize everyone across the globe in the streets. This time for Earth Day, we will be mobilizing online with Earth Day Live, which is a 72-hour, 3-day consecutive live stream featuring stories, conversations, performances, really centered around the stories and voices of those on the front lines, Indigenous, POC leaders. You can really learn more about it and follow along on earthdaylive2020.org.
I love that. So 72 hours it's a decent chunk of time. There's themes. Can you tell me a little bit about what the 3 kind of themes are so people can know what to tune into, and then we can dive straight into those questions from our community?
For sure. Yeah, the organizers have done a great job. So the first day is April 22nd, and the theme is around strike, so focusing on collective power and unity through community building and storytelling. April 23rd is Divest, so led by Stop the Money Pipeline Coalition. And this day of action is really to bring attention to the fact that banks and insurance companies and asset managers are complicit in funding, insuring, and investing in climate crisis. And then April 24th is around Vote. So focusing on political change through really nationwide youth voter registration day. Earth Day Live will be hosting digital voter registration challenge to see which regions in the country can register most voters. So really calling on elected officials and making sure that they support the demands.
That's incredible. I think we're going to talk a little bit about voting later. So I really hope everyone who is in the States has the opportunity to participate in the 24th and really register to vote so that we can make those challenge numbers pretty intense and really exciting. So now that we've run through Earth Day and we're all going to participate, we definitely want to learn more about how we can maintain those components of activism while we're staying inside. And we've got some questions actually from the community. So we asked our Lushies to give us some questions they have about anything related to systemic changes, but also personal actions they can make. So we're gonna dive into that. So we've got our first question from Jessica, who is at Bubble Bartender. And she wants to know how we can be mindful as we impact the environment as we return to business as usual. And to add to that, how do you see the future of the environment being a little bit different?
That's a really good question. Thank you, Jessica. I think it's an interesting time to think about the future of the environmental movement with the current state of the world. As Jessica said, the coronavirus has disrupted business as we know it, and it's also quickly mobilized policymakers, businesses, and communities to work on system-level changes in a coordinated effort globally. And I think many of us who have been hoping and fighting for the environmental movement had hoped that this would happen for the climate crisis. The urgency that Greta and the youth have been calling for. The coronavirus has just had a tighter reaction time between the consequences of the action or inaction. So really my hope for the future is that these same players, the governments, businesses, and communities, realize the urgency in fighting the climate crisis and to be committed to working together at all levels for the systemic change that's needed. We need to live within our planetary boundaries and do it in a way that we're mindful of both the environmental ceiling, but also the social foundation. And this is described really well by Kate Raworth through her concept around donut economics. She describes it as finding that environmentally safe and socially just place in which humanity can thrive. So yes, it's about less plastic, less waste, less pollution, less consumption in terms of what impact it has on our air and waterways so that we don't overshoot the pressure that we put on life's support Earth systems that we fundamentally depend on. It's also about ensuring that we're intentional in redesigning our system to make sure that the social foundations are upheld through policies that are like the New Green Deal, through listening to and respecting Indigenous wisdom, and through the way businesses can and should value and empower people throughout our organizations and supply chain. My hope is that we not just return to business as usual, but that those of us who are in a privileged place where we can take time to pause and reflect and reset, as individuals in how we live our lives, but also as businesses and governments, that we can think about the great aspects of the past that we want to carry forward and build further momentum faster, but also what areas we really need to challenge ourselves to rethink and redesign differently so that we go from doing less harm to really being regenerative for both people and the planet.
I think that's a good point, that potentially business as usual wasn't serving us before either. So returning to business as usual is going to have to come with like larger changes. So I think that that's really important to think about because it's going to be a wild ride. And then speaking of governments, why is voting a really, really important component when we're like looking for climate justice and we're like looking specifically for environmental changes?
Yeah, voting is huge. When you think about it, government policies are created and passed based on the political agendas of the leaders that we choose to elect. And we're so fortunate here in North America to have a democratic process and to be allowed to vote and put into power the leaders that share our values and our ideologies and our belief systems and who, can build these into policies that then shape our society. It's especially important, I think, that we're moving forward with policies, like I mentioned, like the New Green Deal, which considers workers' rights, environmental rights, and human rights towards a just transition. Real policies that will actually reduce greenhouse gas emissions while also addressing societal problems around inequality. There are so many people around the world who fight for the right to vote, and unfortunately, I think too many people here at home just don't realize the power that we do have.
Totally. Thank you so much for giving us that really great deep dive on why voting is important for systemic change. I think it's important for a lot of us to realize that we do have a privilege, especially if you have the ability to vote, that we should use it and really think of other marginalized groups when we're making those voting decisions. We've got another question from Brett at Mr. Brett Young, who's asking us specifically, are there any issues that we're just starting to see bubble up that could have a big impact as we move forward? And is there anything we can do to stop those issues before they become a major problem?
Thanks, Brett. That's a good question. I think there are a lot of issues. I think a lot of them that we've known for a while and are bubbling up from a media perspective more recently. I think it's not necessarily new, but one that I think is relevant to mention is the awareness around environmental refugees and climate migrants. The climate crisis, similar to the coronavirus, has a disproportionate impact on underprivileged communities. And for the coronavirus, it's the communities that don't have the luxury to self-isolate, who don't have the basic needs met. For the climate refugees, it's the people in communities who are hardest hit and who have been displaced and who've had their land and their livelihood impacted by sea level rise and extreme climate. So we often hear in the news about the environmental issues, whether it's microplastics, ocean health, but I feel like the people directly impacted often don't get as much attention in the media. According to the UN, the number of people displaced by the climate crisis is predicted to reach up to 1 billion people by 2050, which is significant. If you look at it just from a purely environmental perspective, the planetary boundaries work that came out of the Stockholm Resilience Center back in 2009 defines the levels that we need to exist on this planet. And we've already surpassed 4 of those 9 boundaries. So climate change, biodiversity loss, deforestation, and phosphorus and nitrogen cycles. So we're seeing already these impacts on the planet and on people.
Oof, that's a lot of things to think about, but thank you for talking to everyone about those intersections. I think it's really important to think about how all of those different kind of issues factor into each other. So next we've got a question that's a little bit more specific to Indigenous leaders. And I want to know, why is it important to listen to Indigenous leaders as they are on the front lines of climate action?
I think it's exactly what you said. It's about climate justice and the intersection of climate action, human and civil rights, social justice. Indigenous leaders have long respected and held sacred and cared for our earth. In many ways, I feel like they have been the original caretakers of this planet and who've had their cultures and their livelihoods destroyed with colonial structures and environmental degradation. So similarly with grassroots climate activists, these are also the ones who are kind of on the front lines in the communities who are most vulnerable and most impacted by climate change. And yet again, these are the folks that are most overlooked. So I think from a movement organizing perspective as a whole, these are the people in the communities that we really need to be listening to and helping to create the space to elevate their voices.
I love that. I think that's a really, really great point. So now that we've talked a lot about Earth Day and sustainability and environmentalism as a whole, I'd love if you could chat with us some specific achievements that have happened over the past year or so that are some wins for the environment, because I think this is also an important time that as we're pausing and reflecting, that we're thinking about what we can celebrate and learn about more things that have like made the movement move forward.
For sure. Yeah, over the past year, there have been a number of wins. You know, some of those big picture wins from a systems level, and also some of those more societal, individual type wins. For one, I think we would all agree the youth-led protests around the globe really further raising the urgency of the climate crisis was significant. It's unfortunate these are the folks that will be bearing the impact of it and have to even raise their voices, but the fact that it did have such a significant impact, I think, is something to recognize. Last year, in 2019, more than 1,200 governments, including 26 national governments, declared a climate emergency. And while these may, seem largely symbolic, they do help build the momentum for some more tangible legislation down the road. I think, in addition to the public declarations from the governments, the momentum also spurred a growing number of companies who've committed to setting science-based targets and align their greenhouse gas emission goals with climate science and what it takes to stay in the 1.5 degrees Celsius or well below 2 degrees Celsius scenarios. Now there's over 850 companies that have joined that movement, which I think is significant because whether it's government or companies or individuals, we all really play a part in it. At a, societal, individual level, I think that, we saw a lot in the news, the shift away from the reliance on single-use plastics. The EU, India, Germany, provinces and states and municipalities in Australia, Canada, and the US all put out legislation banning single-use plastics. And yes, I would say there are many more significant contributors to plastic pollution, but banning single-use plastics, I think, is something that's very tangible, that really connects with everybody on a personal level, and that also impacts our daily habits and routines. So I think there's a lot of power in that. Another area, again, that I think is around that kind of society/individual level is the environmental impact of the food system. It's one of our greatest opportunities to really curb emissions. And we've seen slow shifts in this, and I think we're seeing more and more of it with plant-based alternatives, which have a significantly less impact on the planet compared to animal alternatives. You see this with some of the big fast food chains that are finally offering plant-based burgers and whatnot. I think this is, again, a change of the times that is hopefully setting us in a direction to make some of those bigger changes.
Oh my God, thank you so much. That was so many things to celebrate, which is, I think, really exciting because sometimes we can forget that we've made a lot of progress so far. And this is really just like such good momentum to keep progressing. And like, as you said earlier, it's important that we're always getting better and like looking for new ways that we can become more sustainable all the time. So I love that. So we've talked a lot so far about the like large scale systemic kind of background for Earth Day and sustainability and the movement as a whole. And now we've got some really hot questions from our Lushies about their personal habits. So hopefully with those answers that you provide us, everyone in the audience who's watching this video will be able to take home some really like actionable things that they can do in their everyday life. So first things up is a question from me. I'm just wondering if your routine has changed in the past 5 years, understanding, of course, that you're someone who's always thinking about what that next switch could be to always be progressively more sustainable yourself.
For sure. Yeah, it's something that we always challenge ourselves in our household. And I think for me, life has changed quite a bit for me over the past 5 years. And there have been two big milestones in particular that have really kind of changed and switched up our routine. One is that we had a daughter who just turned 2 a few weeks ago. And that really, thank you, that really thrust us into this world of all the stuff and the waste that's associated with babies and toddlers and kids in general. And from the get-go, we really had a rule to get nothing new. I think there's so much hype and guilt built up in the industry that's really unnecessary. Finding previously loved clothes and passing it on is really the way to go. So that's been one thing for me. The second, again, another big life milestone is that after years of living in apartments and condos, we finally moved into our own little home with a good amount of garden space. In the past, we've been part of community-supported agriculture programs, so CSAs, and community gardens, which we've loved. But having our own garden has been kind of a real switch to our ability to grow our own food and really getting into canning and freezing and helping really localize our food system and growing it ourselves. So I'd say those are two big ones that are really kind of connected a lot with just life changes.
Those are pretty big ones. I think that that's like a good thing to think about too, is like if you are going through a significant life change, what are those like additional steps that you can make to like support the world at the same time? Because I think for me, it's very easy to be like, I'm going through a lot right now, like, but there's always like small steps that you can make that maybe gardening is also really soothing and is like allowing you to relax, like who knows? So next up, we've got some questions from Lushies still. We've got Catherine and Amy, who both have pretty similar questions. So we thought we'd just bucket them together. Both of them are saying that they've seen a lot of companies and businesses advertising things as like environmentally friendly, biodegradable, like the keywords. But they're finding that some of these claims can be misleading, and they're wondering what to look for when they're looking to make purchase decisions.
That's a really great question. I would say first and foremost, look for transparency. So there's a lot to be said for companies that are honest about their communications, companies who are happy to celebrate their successes, but are also open about their shortfalls and specific about the actions that they're going to do to improve in those areas. It's common, I think, in a lot of sustainability issues where there's a complicated web of various issues, whether environmentally related, socially related, human rights issues, animal testing issues. The radically transparent companies are those who aren't afraid to openly discuss those complexities and their rationale behind why they make certain decisions. Whether or not you fully agree with those decisions, I think it's valuable that those companies are being open around their reasoning for it. Another suggestion I would say is not to be shy to ask or challenge companies around some of their environmental aspects or the claims that they make, particularly on social media where they can respond and it's visible to everybody. I think if more customers were to push for environmentally responsible products and packaging and services, then companies would listen to those. For those of us who are working internal to companies, it's really about being able to hear what customers say and being able to build a business case off of that. Coming back to the question just around the claims, that is a tricky one. Claims, logos, certifications, nowadays it can be quite overwhelming to navigate. I would say look for those certifications logos that have third-party verification, so where they're verified by a third organization, and be aware of those buzzwords in packaging itself. Read the ingredients, the fine print, do the research. When it comes to packaging, if it says it's recyclable, actually see what's available in your local municipality to see if it is actually recyclable. And just be mindful of all the sources where companies are making claims.
Thank you so much. I always forget every time I move to look into what the specifics of recycling are in wherever I'm living. So it's definitely something that when I moved to Vancouver, I was keen to take a peek at. So I think that's a really interesting hot tip to note, that recycling is actually very different depending on where you live, and depending on that means that labels aren't always accurate to recycling in your hometown. So I think that that's really important. And then we have a question from Catherine, who she's interested in composting, but she lives in a space where composting is actually just not possible. So she's wondering what alternatives she has. And then additionally, if you can tell us what the difference between something being biodegradable and something being compostable is.
For sure. So let's start with the biodegradable versus compostable. When something is biodegradable, it just means that it can be broken down into many small bits. When something's compostable, it's actually made of organic material. When it does break down, those nutrients go back into the environment. So that's kind of the main difference in the terminology. However, compostable packaging can be tricky depending on the material, because a lot of so-called compostable packaging does indeed break down, but it needs to be in conditions that are not common for commercial composting facilities. On top of that, it's also really difficult for facilities to be able to differentiate some of the material that looks like compostable plastic versus actual plastic. So they just don't accept the compostable version. So I think when it comes to some of the compostable packaging pieces, you just have to be a little bit more conscious and aware around that. To answer the question around composting if you live in a small space or an apartment, I would say first check out to see if there's a community garden in your area. A lot of community gardens will often accept fruit and veggie scraps and use that in their composting heaps to convert it back into quality soil for the garden. You can also do a lot of research around some of the small composting companies and be quite surprised around what you find. We, on the retail side, did a big push to find composting partners to service our shops across North America. And through our passionate staff in many different municipalities, we found over 40 composting partners. And many of them were small-scale social enterprises by unique groups, students, veterans, community members on bikes. The trick is, to be able to find some of these local partners within your community. One tip I would add also, so if you're looking to partner, whether it's a community garden or a local composter, is just to throw all your organic waste into the freezer so that you can store it longer before you make that trip out, and you can avoid all the stink and the flies in your kitchen.
Got to get rid of the stink and the flies. That was when you and I were talking earlier about freezing your compost. That was like a revolutionary moment for me. It was like, I never thought of that before. Don't know why. So definitely a tip that I'm using. So then let's close this off. We've had a lot of great questions from our Lushies, and I hope that this encourages all you Lushies to continue the conversations about how you can be more sustainable in your life. You can always reach out to local organizations and ask them what's going on. You can reach out to us at Lush. Sometimes we know. And then I've got a question from Amy. What are some small changes that she can make at home that have a big impact? So I know there's probably a few things we can tell.
Yeah, there's a lot that we can do at home, ranging from the, personal changes that we can make to getting involved more globally. So if you haven't already, I would start by calculating your environmental footprint. The Footprint Network has a great interactive one that you can do online. And it's great to gain perspective into your own life and some of the bigger hitting changes that you can make and how your own lifestyle compares to other people around the world. So that's one thing. I think also, I'm not sure about you, but for me, during this time of sheltering in place, it really makes me realize how little we actually need. And I think already our family is quite intentional about our consumption in our home. But I think there's always still more that we can do, and to rethink what and how much and where we buy it from. So when it comes to what and how much, it can be around the routines that we have in our life, around food and diet and transitioning towards more plant-based diets, or finding opportunities to support the sharing economy and buying services like a car share rather than automobiles. And when it comes to where you buy goods, I think it's looking at ways that you can support local businesses, support social enterprises that are doing great work in the community, really looking for companies that align with your values and promote the products and services that help to support that. For many of us, I think this time of physical distancing is physical distancing, but socially reconnecting. And it's a great opportunity to reconnect with friends and family around environmental issues that are important to you. And taking that time to first research, the science, the intersectionality between movements that you care about. So whether it's Indigenous sovereignty, connected with a climate action movement, there's so many different issues that are so connected. So get more informed and then get vocal virtually. Vocally in this time of physical distancing will look quite different. It can be sharing posts from organizers of movements you believe in, participating in online conversations. I think we've all been doing this in the past, but I think this is a chance to really elevate that and do it more. Whether it's in person or online, I think joining movements help to advocate and amplify the values that we believe in. Volunteering also can look quite different during this time, but it can be volunteering your time with online organizations, some campaigning work, report compiling, admin work that really helps keep organizations running. If anything, I think during this time we've all learned the value of connecting virtually and the power that we have in the online space to really advocate and amplify values and messages that we care about.
Totally. I am very pro digital activism. I think that it's like something that's underrated, but also like a lot of organizations are, like, as you said, they do a lot of work online already. So if we can support and help that while we're at home too, that's really great. I know that also I'm very thankful right now for the internet. I think the past couple of weeks have just made me like realize how much I like being able to connect in a digital space, and how that's definitely like a crutch that I'm holding on to right now. So all of those things can still be done, but online. And then that's kind of the meat or the tofu and potatoes of what we've got today from questions from our Lushies. Before we ended, I thought it would be really great to share some stories from Lushies about things that they've already committed to in their personal life. So really talking about how our Lushies in the community have already reset their routines and are making those small changes so that we can like build what those changes are to the rest of us and be really excited for them and celebrate those successes and, you know, just like have a good time. So the first thing we've got is we've got something exciting from Bethany to celebrate. And she recently switched her home energy to green energy. And she told me by email that she actually did this because her state has like a program. But she just went to a site called myheropower.com and she like easily made the switch. It like wasn't a huge thing she had to sign up for. It was just like a couple buttons. You're like, done. Now you have green energy in your apartment. And then that's not always an option for everybody, but if it is an option for you, I would definitely encourage you to make that switch. It makes a big difference when we're rerouting power. That's amazing. I feel like, you know, a lot of utility companies offer renewable energy directly, but there are third parties companies who offer it as well. So if you don't have something through your utility company, you can totally look at your own household consumption and then match that with renewable energy credits. Love that. And then we've got one more kind of good feel / like positive thing we want to celebrate from Thea. And she recently switched to a vegetarian diet in July, and she now eats vegan twice a week, which I know we've talked about a little bit. It's a huge impact, right? That is huge. That's such a great change. I think when you're looking for some of those big hitting changes that you can do that have significant impacts, animal agriculture is responsible for 18% of greenhouse gas emissions, so more than the combined exhaust of all transportation. So I think this is a big one, again, that is an individual change that each of us can make that has quite a significant impact globally. That's a lot of impact. Thanks, Katrina. And that's kind of all we've got time for today. You Lushies have heard us talk about kind of why Earth Day. We've talked about systemic changes that need to be made so that we can continue the positive environmental movement. And we've talked about some kind of key things that you can do at home right now, especially if you want to participate in indoor activism. This is the time to get started and to like really join those organizations and elevate those voices. So Katrina, before we go, is there anything you want to remind us of? I think it's just, you know, first of all, participate by joining in at earthdaylive2020.org. And then I think it would be coming back to what we, you know, really started with around this is our time to pause and reset. You know, those of us who are online right now, who are fortunate enough to be in a place where we can pause, take that time to appreciate the aspects of our lives and of our communities and of our economies that are good. You know, for those areas where we've left paths of pollution or destruction, disparity or inequality, you know, challenge ourselves to reimagine and redesign a new path forward that really focuses on climate justice and what we've really been talking about over this time. And I don't think it will necessarily be easy. You know, there will be a lot of financial pressures as we come out of this on the other side, but I think it's really asking ourselves, how do we challenge ourselves to be more intentional in building a future where everyone, all people and animals, can live together in a socially just world within our planetary boundaries. So that's what I would leave you with. So thanks, Lushies, for tuning in. It was really, really great to be able to answer your questions, celebrate your successes, and talk about what the next kind of stages in the climate action movement are. We want to hear what you're doing in your personal life and what systemic changes you're able to make, so definitely comment and tell us what's going on. I'd also love to hear about what you all think the future of sustainability could look like. And then I want to thank Katrina for being here and participating and answering all of those questions and putting so much thought into them. And stay tuned, Lushies, because we've got a few more Earth Day related activities popping up throughout the week, and we're definitely excited to see you all participate in #EarthDayLive. Thanks for having me, for the great questions, and really to each of you out there online that, you know, are taking actions this Earth Day and every day. Thank you. I love it. Yay, bye Lushies.